Hello guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the build of the FB Jets F15 massive aircraft. Let's roll that intro and we will get into this build. Alright, well, I'm holding the nose for a pretty specific reason. I think that in this episode we will finally get the nose bolted on. I think it was 2 episodes ago in the build series where I said that maybe we'd get the nose bolted on in that episode. Oh well, we had lots of stuff to do. So thanks guys for watching the channel. Thanks for tuning into this build. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. It helps the channel. Also, if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button down below, whichever side it's on. And when you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified when I release new videos. All right, so last episode we left off. We were working on the main tray, getting things almost completed. And that's where we're continuing on this episode. So main tray is mapped out as far as what we want to do. Now what we need to do is get everything kind of funneled to that location so we can hook it up and have the main tray installed. So we're going to have to run our last lines from like the turbine ECUs forward and kind of get all that stuff geared up. So we'll try and make quick work of that and hopefully get this nose bolted on soon. All right, guys, again, just working on everything that's going to go forward in the plane. So did up 2 leads here for the throttle channels. So we've got T1 and T2. So those are dedicated for the turbine 1 and 2. So those obviously get run to this area and work their way forward to where the receiver is going to be. So that's one of the last things we need to run forward. And then the next thing is going to be the battery leads themselves. So on the GSUs or the data relay modules or the ECUs, whatever you want to call them. So we've got pump and battery on this lead here. So the pump lead obviously is the MPX. That's labeled as pump. And this is our battery lead. So, all right, so next thing we got to do is make some extensions for the turbine cables, for the battery cables. So the ECU is going to sit right here. The stock cable comes to about here, so we need to go from there forward. Now, generally, in this kind of case, I would probably cut the line and solder the line together, but I'm not going to do that in this case. Reason for that is I want to keep the stock wire on the stock connector. You know, if these turbines ever come out and the owner decides to switch them to a different brand of turbine, like a nice pair of Xicoy 170s that would fit beautifully in there, or 140s, this is going to be easy to disconnect. So I found some spare leads that I had, so that will give us the Deans to Deans connector, and then we'll just use this wire and extend that the distance that we need to. Now on the front, we're using the Spektrum battery connectors. And these are the batteries that the owner is going to be using. So the 3-cell life batteries. So that's going to be on the other end is that connector. So that is what we're using on the plane. So I'm going to get that all soldered up and we will continue. All right, guys, so we got both of the extensions made up for the turbines. So we've got, like I discussed, our Deans plug that's going to go into the turbine end. And then we've got our EC3 connector, the Spektrum ones, IC3 connectors that go all the way to the front. So those are done up. Now we can run those guys. And that basically is everything that we need to run forward. So that is good progress. All right, time for another tip time, guys. So in this case, when we have the 2 Deans connectors going together, now on typical Deans connectors, you could actually use a small zip tie. These things, I know everybody's got different names for them, but on a typical Deans setup, you could use the zip ties and hold the connector together. In this case, we've got the Kingtech Dean's connector and then a true Dean's connector going together. So what I do in this case is put a little bit of shoe goop on the connector, and that holds it together. We could use shrink tube. The problem with that position in the plane is if we put shrink tube in there, it's an absolute nightmare to cut that shrink tube off later. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So right down in there, we've got our Dean's connector, and basically I put a little bit of shoe goop on top there, and it is nice and solid. And once it's cured, it will be not coming apart unless we want it to. So I just want to take a quick note, guys, and show you this cool little product that my buddy overseas, Christian Vogel, sent this to me. It's a little MPX mold. Very, very cool little thing, and I'll show you what this does. So basically what you do is you separate this. You can put an MPX connector in there. You can do one side or the other side or both at the same time, and it makes a covering for the wires. So super cool little tool. So I just did this on the diamond connection here because I had just the wires heat shrinked on there. So you can see I just put this female end in, or male, I guess, depending on which way you look at it. Put that in the mold and just use hot glue, and within like less than a minute you've got a beautiful molding covering all your wires, and also ensuring that the wires don't pull off, or when you're pulling this apart you've got somewhere to grab. And then all you do is take side cutters or a knife or whatever and just pull these things off like that, and works absolutely beautifully. I'll put a link to his website down below. It's vogel-fly.de. So check that link down below when you're done this video, guys. This is a cool little tool, and very, very happy to have received this. Thank you. All right, guys, most of the build at this stage is just tedious little things, running lines, organizing, stuff like that. So not overly exciting stuff, but I'll share my progress with you. So we got both power lines run for the turbines up to the front. So now those are both up here. I should mark that other one. I did run the vent line for the smoke tank, so that's just going to the vent fitting there, so that's done. This line here coming forward, that's going to be the plug-in for the air brake, the electronic air brake on the hatch cover. So that's going to be a very well used plug there. And that's basically what I've been doing. Just installed a couple little keepers here. I love these little single round dot wire keepers. They're available on my website, and they're amazing little things. So that's where we've progressed to, and just continuing to organize. So next thing I'm going to work on here is getting all of the engine components installed and laid out for both turbines. So really not overly complicated here. Probably the most trickiest and most complicated part is going to be running the fuel lines. And reason for that is we initially thought we were going to put the pumps underneath the board. Problem is that we didn't think about the cross brace here. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to put the pumps right here. I was thinking about putting them this way. Problem is that we need to loop back around and get the fuel fit line run to the turbine. So I'm not really entirely sure how I'm going to run it. I may still run it this way. I'm just going to do some figuring out and sorting here, but all you're really doing is running all the lines to everything, right? So it's pretty straightforward. I will show you guys the finished product because this isn't complicated. You line up the inputs and the connections as it's instructed on your brand of turbines. So pretty straightforward, and I'll get this installed and I'll show you guys the final product. All right, guys, both turbines have been plumbed, installed, and all that stuff. So everything's neatly done. You'll notice that the cables are different on this turbine compared to that one. These are the older cables for the G2 engines, that's why, and that's just what this turbine has. So anyways, that's all finished. A couple important notes here. Obviously we've got our fuel filter installed, and we've got a little bit of wrapping material here on our cables that touch the carbon formers. So same thing on this side. I put a little bit of the cable wrap around there. So that's done. Yeah, the only thing left to plug into here is going to be the GSU, which is sitting essentially right here on the plate. So nice and easy to plug in. We've got our on-off valves for each side. So everything's nice and visible, everything's workable. We will put shoe goop on all of our connector points on the pump, the connector points on the ECUs, all that kind of stuff as well too. We'll do that as one of the final steps. So that's all finished. Next thing we'll be working on is getting our main plate installed, which involves a bunch of plumbing and air systems and stuff like that. Really close to getting that nose installed on the plane. And because of that, our bundle of wires is getting more and more crazy. All right, guys, we are back at her tonight. So the next goal for tonight is to get the main board installed. So it's just a matter of running all the lines and connecting everything to the board. It's going to be a bit tricky because we got to get a bunch of stuff hooked up before we actually install it on the aircraft. So we're just kind of organizing all that stuff right now and getting stuff figured out. Essentially, the system's going on here is we've got the main air supply, which needs to hook up to the valve right there, or that little nipple right there. We've got one of the supplies right here, another supply right there. Those need to be run towards the front, and then also we'll tee them off to our air board that's right here. And then we've got our light system switch, which is going right there, and the light system box itself is going to sit kind of in this area. This connector here is for a servo plug to go into. That's going to connect to the Failsafe, the Xicoy Failsafe, so we have access to it if we need to reprogram it or anything. And then that's our main soft on-off switch, which we need an extension to going to the front for the receiver. So that's all the stuff that we need to kind of get hooked up and sorted out. And then we've got some other things like our fuel fill lines and everything that which are going to be coming out here. And then we'll have our smoke up there as well too. So lots to figure out, but that's what we're working on. So to all you guys that question who will ever need 18 channels, well, they get eaten up pretty quick if you want full control of everything. So here's our list of all the channels that we have. I'm not going to verbally go through them, but that's basically all of them. We do have a 20 channel receiver. Problem is it's a DX18 that Chad has for the plane. So essentially we've got 18 channels which are completely eaten up by whatever we've got going on. So leftover stuff, we've got lights number 1 and lights number 2 to figure out, which are, this is our controller here, and we've got our light outputs right there. So really what we have to do, or the best way to deal with this, is we do have some extra channels on the Xicoy Failsafe. So we've got channel 4 and channel 5 still open. So what we can do there is we can have a condition on channel 4 saying when the gear is down, this is open or closed or whatever we have to do to make the light controller work when gear is down for the landing lights. And then for output number 5, we can just have that as always on. So when the plane gets turned on, the light controller is automatically on. So it's probably the best solution where we don't have to use any Ys or any matchboxes or anything on any of the primary surfaces, and we still get some functionality of the landing lights. So that's the solution that we're working towards. All right, so everything is hooked up. We are pretty much organized and ready to install this plate. So I'll show you just a shot of the underside here. So what we did was we extended the on-off switch for the light setup. So the light setup can kind of go in this area in front of the aircraft. Man, what a mess, eh? Look at that. I need to back up to see all that. So we ended up attaching the smoke pump, the afterburner lights, and the light setup all to one battery plug. So that's going to provide power for everything, and I think that's going to work out good. Obviously, we've got a mishmash of wires, but that's everything. So we've got these two, which are the fill valves for the other things, the brakes.
Brakes and the canopy lock.
Yeah, brakes, canopy lock. So those are running forward, and yeah, that's how we have everything organized on the underside. So we're just going to run these last few things forward, and then we can screw the main plate into place. All right, we are installed. Everything worked out good. This is, I think, a beautiful looking install. It looked really, really good. It turned out really, really good. Really happy with everything that's going on back here. There's lots going on in this back hatch, but it's all very, very organized, and quite happy with everything. So. All right, so next thing we're going to work on is the flux capacitor. Very important step. We're going to get the flux capacitor created, and once that's done, then we can install the nose, but this is a critical step to installing the nose. All right, so next thing we're working on is the flux capacitor, which incorporates into the smoke system. So next thing we're going to do is make our smoke nozzles and work our way forward to the flux capacitor. So what we're using for our smoke nozzles is the K&S tubing, just stainless steel tubing. This is 3/16 stuff, so you can see it there. And all we're going to do is squish these guys, and it's a pretty straightforward process. I like to put an X-Acto blade in them as they get squished down, and that helps control the opening. Because what usually happens is when you squish this down, the ends will stay open and the center part closes. So the whole point of the X-Acto blade is to keep the center part open like the sides. So I'll show you guys the kind of process here. Okay, so I did this one a little bit in my vise, and I didn't go all the way closed so I could show you guys what exactly happened. So it kind of looks like a figure 8. And you can see the center part squishes more than the outside. So what I'll do now is I'm going to stick my X-Acto blade in there, and I'll hold it on the ground and actually smash it with a hammer, and that makes a nice even opening all the way across. So, but that's what you're trying to avoid, is having the openings on both sides. You want it to be a nice slot going all the way across. All right, so got a bunch of things accomplished. We got the smoke nozzles all finished. So there's the final outcome there. And we've got the smoke nozzles all bent, matching ones for each side. We got the clamps for the smoke nozzle made. This is just made out of stainless steel strapping. You bend it around, cut it off, drill a hole through it. And if you drill those holes really, really close to the actual nozzle, when you tighten them down, it compresses everything and holds them really tightly in place. And we also have a clamp or a strap on the angle and a strap on the flat or the straight part, so it's not going to be going anywhere when we install it, and it'll be installed on the lower rail. So we did a couple last bits of gluing tonight where we glued the filter holders on each side with Hysol, and we just installed the clips for the smoke and fuel fill lines, which are right here. 3D printed parts available on the lightersideofrc.com. Check it out, link below. All right, so that's it for tonight, guys. We're going to let this stuff dry, and it's getting a little bit late, so we will let this plane rest because we all need our sleep. And tomorrow, when it wakes up, it'll be even more beautiful than it was today. All right, so we are very, very close. We've got the GSU installed. The wires run to the ECU. We've got the other GSU. We're just putting this spiral wrap around the wires, and then they're getting tucked in right there, which is kind of a nice tight fit and a short little run to the GSUs or the ECUs. And our flux capacitor is almost complete. We just put our little line holders on there. The shoe goop is curing, and once the flux capacitor gets installed into the line holders, it will harness its power, and the F15 will come alive. And we also got the smoke system installed as well too. I forgot to show you that. That's where the flux capacitor runs to, is the smoke nozzles, which both of them are installed there. And you can see them if you look right in the center of the engine down there. That's where our smoke sticks are. So that is all complete. They're nice and solid and ready to make smoke. All right, so I got sick and tired of trying to put lines together, so now it's Chad's job. Okay, guys, so we're just organizing the front section here. So basically what we've done to start is we've pulled all the air lines out and grouped them together. We've run the power or any servo leads or anything over top, just so we've got a nice working area to get stuff figured out here. So essentially what we're doing at this point is we are running what we can to the board. Now we do have to remember that some of these things like the closing doors, the ones that open and close, the nose one also opens and closes. So we need to tee those outputs off and have an outlet going towards the front. And then we've got our canopy air valve, which needs to go forward, and our brake air valve, which comes to the T that we're working on right now. But then we've got gear, main, gear, front. So it's really the closing ones that we need to tee the outputs going forward. But that's what we're doing. So we're organizing all this stuff, hooking it up to the board, and then putting the board in once we're satisfied with everything there. All right, so everything is hooked up. It looks still like a mess, but it is quite organized. So once the plate slips up to the top here, we've got some airlines running down the left, some running down the right. So we're just doing our final servo connections here. So we've got quite a bit going on, obviously. As we discussed previously, the light controller is going to plug in to the gear sequencer in there. We've got the extension for our programming hub or input, which is over on the board, plugged in, and then Chad's just doing up a extension for the input, which goes to the receiver itself that we need to plug in there. So once that's done, this can be laid into place. We'll probably put some shoe goop on those connectors first before we lay that in, because access is very, very poor. And once that's done, we can fasten that plate, and we should be able to bolt the nose on. All right, guys, so there's a shot of everything just before we are putting it in place. So we've got both sides free and clear. We just shoe gooped all the connectors. We've got our connectors coming forward. So we are good to install the plate in the aircraft. Big steps. All right, guys, we are installed and quite a bit more organized. It doesn't look organized still, but that's like half the wires and crap we had hanging out compared to before. So we're doing good, feeling good, everything looks good. We just hooked the smoke system up, so basically we already installed this T, and the point of this T is now we've got our fill line right here, and the smoke supply is right there. So this is the intake of the pump, and then the output on the pump goes towards the back to the flux capacitor area. So everything is done in this area for now. One of the next big things that we probably want to get done before we bolt the nose on is the actuator for the canopy. Because our actuator is longer, we need to modify this mount down here that the electronic actuator will go into. So that's probably easier to do now before we bolt the nose on. So that's going to be probably the next big step that we accomplish. And then I really hope that we can bolt the nose on in this video. We'll see. But that's the next thing we're working on. Okay, guys, so the linear actuator that we're using for the canopy on this is the Accutronics. There's the model number there. So I think it's 50 millimeters of travel would be my assumption. And this is the one that we are replacing. So you can see that the cylinder is a little bit longer on the Accutronics one versus the air cylinder. So what we need to do is we need to check and see how this fits and modify the mount accordingly. So if we look at the stock holes are right here at the very bottom. Now the Accutronics, we can still use this fiberglass horn, but we're going to have to put our hole near the top. Now that actually works out in our favor. I'm glad we can keep all this stuff because you don't want to have this perfectly accurate with the arm all the way closed. These things work on servo travel, so I would like to have this actually closing the canopy and sticking out just a little bit further. So we've got a little bit of play there as well too. But seeing this works really well. So all I'm going to do is put our hole as close as I can to this top portion and trim it off, and that'll be awesome. That'll work well. So I'm going to pull this canopy off, and we'll take a look at modifying that. Okay, so if we look at the setup here, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the hole lined up as close as I can to that horizontal piece. I'm going to mark my my hole for my bolt that's going to go through, and then we're just going to chop that off, leaving a decent amount of material, and that should work out beautifully. Now, all the linear actuators from Accutronics that I've had before all have the same array of hardware that comes with it. So the other thing that works really well is this piece here, which you can take this one out and actually screw this one in, and then you can put like a 440 rod in there. You just drill it out and screw it in. So there's quite a few options with how these things work, and then these are all just different mounting options. Like these guys go over top of the actuator and stuff like that. So that's what that's all there for. So nice and versatile. All right, so this side is all done. We have to make that amount of material between the actuator and the hole quite thin in order to get any sort of movement here. So that's all the movement we have right now. Hopefully that's enough, and it should work out for us. So next thing we have to do is the other mounting point has these kind of ridges right here. We've just got to sand the high points down in order for the actuator to have enough space to reach those holes right there for the bolt assembly. So I'm just going to use my Dremel and sand that down. Alright guys, so one of the issues that I've run into here is with the linear actuator in the stock position, it has an angle kind of like this in relation to the canopy. Yeah, it's actually just like that. So the problem is that it actually doesn't have enough force to open up the canopy, which makes sense because this is really, you're pushing back towards the pivot point. So mechanically it just doesn't make sense. So what we need to do is get it either vertical or a little bit at an angle like that to make this all work. So to show you from the back side here, the stock position is towards the front of the aircraft, and what we need to do is bring it over top of the retract unit like that. So what I'm thinking about doing is basically gluing two pieces of ply that go up, that go on either side of the air cylinder, and we will be able to position that where we're comfortable, drill a hole through those pieces of ply, and that will allow us to have good mechanics to make this system work. Now I've tried it just holding it here with my hands and everything, and it works out good. So I'm going to get those pieces glued in, and we'll have to let those set. I'm going to use high sol with them, and but I think that's the best solution, easiest solution, and it's also going to make that canopy work way better. It may work using the stock position, but it's really not reliable, and we need this to be reliable. So I'm going to get those pieces made up and glued in place. So I just fabricated this all up with CA. So I glued the cross piece in there and got the position of everything done. Just so you're aware, the width of the air cylinder is 25-ish millimeters. So I just made a 25 millimeter by 25 millimeter square to go in between there. And then once it was installed, I used high sol to glue that all in place. So now the linear actuator can be mounted essentially vertically, which gives it its best geometry with this setup. So we're going to let that stuff cure. We still have lots of room for our mounting of our receiver and stuff like that, so that's all fine. We're going to put the light controller, probably stick it on the side there, and that should work out beautifully. Really, really close to being able to bolt this nose on. Alright guys, while we wait for the mount to dry, I'm also doing some other things in the nose here. So I'm going to silicone the air tanks in for the brakes and the actuators for the canopy locks. I did already put the tray in there and get our screw holes put in. That's where the batteries are going to mount, or one of the options where the batteries can mount. So those are done, and I'm just going to glue those tanks in, and that step will be finished. One side note, generally I would have the lines coming off the tanks there, but with the way this is all set up, we've got our lines that are going to the tanks right here, and they're set up nice and long. So what we'll do when this is bolted on is we'll just fish those lines through and then just plug them into the air tanks. That shouldn't be a problem at all. Last thing before I bolt the nose on here is I wanted to take the gear out, get the servo set up, make sure I checked all the bolts and everything for Loctite and position and everything. I just wanted to make sure also that this was actually seated in all the way into the trunnion, which it is. And then I wanted to get some silicone lube inside of the gear itself because it was a little bit tight. So that's all done. The leg's been reinstalled on the landing gear itself. And that also gives us an opportunity to treat those screw holes with some CA when we put it back in. So there's a couple things here with the servo mount that's a little bit difficult. So number one, this servo mount actually, or the servo itself, needs to be positioned down towards the tire as much as possible. Reason for that is when it retracts, the servo is going to hit the gear. So fortunately, there's a lot of material in this corner here. I've spaced this servo out as much as I'm comfortable with, and what I did was I used the hardware from the actual Bluebird servos, so the screws, which are also the right thread. I did put the rubbers and spacers on the servo. I don't generally run them on any of the surfaces on the jets, but on the landing gear, definitely not a bad thing because there's lots of vibration that comes through the servo. But in this case, we needed it just for spacer. And then I took one of the nuts and put it on the back side there and then screwed it in, so that allows me a bit more space. Now, if we tuck that servo right tight, I mean, in order to make this work, we'd have to chop off the entire corner of the landing gear, which is not going to work. So in this case, we only have to take off a couple millimeters of the corner. We'll just use the Dremel and grind that off, and that'll be a good compromise from spacing the servo out even more and grinding the gear. So what we're going to do here is get this set up on the arm. Now, because of the ball joint that's used here, there's actually not a lot of movement available, which is kind of crappy, but hopefully it's enough to make this actually work. So the amount of movement you have is the amount of movement side to side on the ball joint. I know on something like my Diamond with the Baotech gear, or my Tudor from Carf with the Baotech gear, they actually use like a ball and a cup that goes over the ball, so there's a lot more movement or play there in the actual setup, so you can get more steering out of it. But I think this is probably successful for people that have flown this plane before, so we're going to use it. So anyways, I'm going to get that set up. We'll get this reinstalled back in the front nose section, and then we will be ready to bolt the nose section on the fuselage. Alright guys, and there is a shot of how much I took off. So that was a sharp corner before, so didn't have to take off very much. You can see it there. I took off as much as I needed, and then I added a little bit extra just in case this plate ever bends or anything like that. We've got a little bit of wiggle room there built in. So anyways, that part's done. Next thing to do is hook this up to one of my channels on my test receiver, and we'll get the servo installed. Alright guys, final step for this video. We are going to bolt this nose on. So the nose hardware, we've got 4 large Allen screws and 2 small ones. The 4 big ones go into the rear part of the fuselage. The 2 small ones actually go into the intakes through the side. So we've got Loctite here, we've got our tools. We're going to get this nose lined up. We're going to get all this mess of stuff fed into the nose, and we're going to bolt this thing up. Alright guys, nose is bolted on. It was a bit of a pain. And if you think we had a rat's nest before, Now we have the same rat's nest, but it's just combined or squished into the small little area. But big step. And the plane just grew in size by a lot. This thing is huge. It is an absolute monster. I'm 6 feet tall. My arm length is the same as your height, so I'm about 6 feet in arm length. And there's a lot more plane hanging out over there. It is a big plane. Pretty cool. We got a lot accomplished in this video. Big step of getting that nose on. We are getting very close to the end of this video. So we've got all the organization to do in the nose. We do still have our wings to do as well too, so that'll be coming up soon. But we are getting very close. We should be wrapped up on this plane very soon, and the maiden will be coming soon as well too. So thanks guys for watching. Thank you for tuning in to the build series, all of them, and thanks for supporting the channel. I do appreciate all the kind words, kind comments, and great feedback that you guys give. So don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Hit that like button down below, the thumbs up button. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And when you do hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you do get notified when I release new videos. Thanks guys for tuning in. We will see you in the next video.